David Hess is a singer-songwriter who wrote Elvis Presley's hits such as All Shook Up and Pat Boone's Speedy Gonzales, as well as composed the soundtrack for perhaps the most disturbing film of all time, being Wes Craven's Last House on the Left from 1972. David Hess also performed all 4 songs on that film's soundtrack: The Road Leads to Nowhere,
And the road leads to nowhere.
Sadie and Krug,
Weasel and Sadie, Junkie and Dad.
and Now You're All Alone, which Tarantino used in The Hateful Eight.
You're all alone.
Hess is also an actor, most famous for portraying the lead heavy in both Craven's Last House on the Left and Ruggero Deodato's The House on the Edge of the Park, which was marketed as the sequel to Craven's Last House.
Now, let's not spoil the party by doing the wrong thing.
However, Hess also starred in a number of pictures of different genres, but for horror fans specifically, the tall curly-haired actor is most remembered for having starred in films such as Yet Again, Craven's Swamp Thing and Deodato's Body Count, as well as in 2 Uli Lommel films, Zombie Nation and Zodiac Killer, and Pascal Festa Campanile's Hitchhike. However, not a lot of people are aware that David Hess has another important creative credit to his name: a director. In 1980, the film To All A Goodnight was released, with David Hess taking the directing credit. To All A Goodnight is generally considered awful, but let me ask you this: which horror fan wouldn't want to see a classic 1980s slasher directed by Last House on the Left's Krug himself? I know I would. To All A Goodnight is actually great. The film stars Jennifer Runyon, Forrest Swanson, and Linda Gentile. The film is about a group of teenagers at a girls' finishing school who are stalked by a mysterious killer in a Santa Claus suit. The first thing to note is that To All A Goodnight is the first ever Santa Claus killer feature film. The only other previous appearance of a Santa Claus killer was in the Joan Collins segment of the anthology film Tales from the Crypt from 1971. To All A Goodnight, from the start, is absolutely terrible, especially in filmmaking. The film is badly lit, and is so badly edited that you can feel most of the cuts. In fact, the lighting of the film is so terrible that when the picture was released on VHS in the United States in 1983, many scenes have literally been hard to see in VHS quality. The bad acting is excusable, as many slashers also contain this problem. However, the dialogue that Alex Rebar, star of The Incredible Melting Man, who wrote the script, gives to the characters is just awful, and it is completely amateur and unrealistic.
Keep watching. Any minute now, 8 tiny reindeer are going to be coming along, and one of them's going to have shiny red nose.
The directing is also terrible. Sorry, Mr. Hess. And the pauses in dialogue between characters is actually really funny.
Maybe we shouldn't.
Melody.
5 years of karate. I'm a black belt.
Speaking about funny, after I sunk into and acknowledged the awfulness of this film, I sunk into this film and started to find it absolutely hilarious and ended up having a fun and chill time with both this film and with its characters. The reason this film felt so laid back to me is because its narrative occurrence of events is very traditional in the slasher film sense. A group of teens have a party, some try to and some end up getting laid. And ultimately the teens just behave like normal teens. So it is almost normal that most of them will end up getting murdered, in the slasher film sense. This obvious trend of events, as well as the obvious behavior of the teenage characters, is one thing that makes this film very chilled and laid back. However, the obviousness of the narrative in a slasher film usually makes the film pretty bad, such as in The Burning, which I just simply do not find good in any way except the soundtrack. However, what makes David Hess's To All A Goodnight stand out is the fact that I actually cared for the characters. Possibly it was the very fact that this film was so laid back, and because I was having such a fun time with these foolish teenagers who just wanted to have fun and to have sex, that made me actually quite distressed when danger arose. The Burning was actually trying to be a good picture, whereas Hess's film is not.
You've never done it before, have you?
Done what?
You know.
Oh, of course I have.
Of course you haven't.
I felt like it knew what it was, and it was simply using that very fact to its advantage. One very entertaining thing about this picture is spotting all of its mistakes and flaws. But like the great Tarantino says, we do not laugh at the picture, we laugh with the picture, because if you think you are better than a certain film, you are truly not. One really funny thing about this film is some bluntly obvious and shameless reusing of the exact same shot of the Santa Claus killer's legs going up some stairs. Like many slashers, To All A Goodnight also has a tragic event that happens in the film's past, an event by which the killer was psychologically affected by. However, unlike Roger Spottiswood's truly creepy slow-motion shots of the prank victim freaking out, tangled in bed drapes, in Terror Train, or even in Charles Sellier's comedic Silent Night, Deadly Night, its tragic event of both of Billy's parents being brutally murdered is very affecting and upsetting to watch. Whereas in Hess's film, the direction and filmmaking is so atrocious that the tragic death of a certain character is so fake and so anticlimactically executed that it is laugh out loud funny. The Santa Claus killer is ridiculous, and there is one shot in particular where he is creeping in the background behind a glass, and the anticlimax of his appearance is just absolutely hilarious.
Seems alright.
Such a wacky killer. Also, when the killer attacks, it is so cringy and anticlimactic and badly directed that is also just laugh out loud funny. If you pay attention closely, you will realize who the killer will turn out to be from the very beginning of the film. Some of the murders are truly disturbing, actually, particularly the one in the bathroom. And also, the film's final scene, as well as the final freeze-frame shot, is actually really cool and quite creepy. To All A Goodnight was given a limited theatrical release in the United States and was poorly reviewed by critics. However, released in 1980, during the year of the American and Canadian slasher boom, David Hess's To All A Goodnight is an incredibly fun and laid-back time at the picture show, and I highly recommend this unfairly looked-down-upon classic slasher gem, as much as I do all the other truly great slashers from that same year.